According to United States Army Marine Corps Counterinsurgency Field Manual, and I quote, 20 counterinsurgents per 1,000 residents is often considered the minimum troop density required for effective counterinsurgency operations. End of quote. Now, given that there are 32,738,376 people living in Afghanistan, that's according to the CIA World Factbook, if we do the math, it would require some 654,767 troops in order to wage a successful counterinsurgency operation there. Now, that's according to the United States Army Marine Corps Counterinsurgency Doctrine. By mid-July, we will have some 68,000 troops in Afghanistan. In addition, there will be approximately 33,000 NATO troops there. Well, that's about double the number that was in Afghanistan at the end of 2008. President Obama's top military and civilian advisors have indicated that the number is unlikely to grow much beyond that. The Afghan National Army has also expanded its forces to approximately 90,000 troops. Again, doing the math, the coalition in Afghan troop strength totals 191,000. That's some 400,000 short of our own counterinsurgency doctrine requirement. The Soviet Union force in Afghanistan, by the way, including its communist Afghan allies, totaled around 380,000, and they failed in their mission to defeat the resistance. As a result of an inadequate number of boots on the ground, we have and will continue to increasingly rely upon airstrikes, both drone and manned missions, with the inevitable consequence of an increase in civilian casualties. A 2009 UN report indicates that NATO bombing has killed over 2,100 civilians in Afghanistan in 2008. That's a 40% rise from 2007. In addition, the Obama administration has authorized over 20 Predator attacks thus far in Pakistan, all in violation of international law, by the way. Now, there are both pragmatic and moral reasons why the Obama strategy is flawed. Tactically, in this type of low-intensity conflict, the use of airstrikes is clearly non-productive and has become part of a strategy employed by the insurgents, much to their advantage. By intermingling with the local population, they have provoked a kind of military response. Airstrikes to compensate for the inadequate number of troops on the ground. Strikes that will alienate and infuriate the local people and encourage recruitment into the insurgent ranks. These strikes, besides doing little to disrupt the Taliban, have killed civilians and have fueled support for the Islamists. The population ends up siding with the Taliban then, not because they are sympathetic with their ideology, but because they have come to see the coalition forces as occupiers and aggressors. And the longer we stay, the worse it becomes. In a 2005 opinion poll, some 83% of Afghans were favorably disposed towards America. Today, it is less than 47%. Historically, military occupations, especially those that leave thousands of civilians dead and wounded in its wake, fail to win the hearts and minds of the people, and therefore is doomed to failure.
The Americans have bombed defenseless women and children. Hostility against the Americans is growing. They hate them even more than they did the Russians. The people who are fighting with the Taliban are the sons, the brothers and uncles of those killed by the Americans. They have joined the Taliban and are fighting the Americans because they want to avenge their brothers, their fathers, their cousins.
Collateral damage is the concept, the mechanism that we utilize to explain, excuse, even justify the killing of tens, even hundreds of thousands of civilians. I believe that the moral argument against the killing of civilians, and hence against the continued occupations of Afghanistan and Iraq and the war in Pakistan, is conclusive, and is even more important than the pragmatic argument. If a war is immoral, then it should not be fought, regardless of whether it is winnable or the strategy for victory effective. Consequently, the moral argument trumps any pragmatic argument that can be offered. Now, inherent in modern war-making practice is the conviction that there is a significant moral difference between killing innocent civilians in an attack such as that on the World Trade Center or on a bus filled with college students, and killing non-combatants during a military response to such an attack. Now, this conviction is clearly demonstrated in many of the Israeli reprisals against Palestinian groups such as Hamas, and in the U.S. war in Vietnam, Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq. It is reflected as well, I think, in the language that we use to describe the innocent deaths, the value-laden term terrorism in the case of the former, and the morally neutral term collateral damage in the latter. Now, war, even as a response to terrorism, is rule-governed. According to just war theory and a myriad of international agreements and treaties, war is evaluated according to whether established criteria can be satisfied. One of the most important rules of war is the legal and moral prohibition against the targeting and killing of innocents, that is, the criterion of discriminating and affording of immunity to non-combatants. Now, since non-combatants are neither directly nor indirectly involved in the prosecution of a terrorist attack or of a war, they have done nothing to warrant a forfeiture of their immunity, that is, their natural immunity, their inalienable human rights. Consequently, to kill non-combatants to further some goal or objective, whether the goal be political, religious, or social, even if for a just cause, is never justifiable. It is to commit murder, and fundamental to our understanding of what terrorism is. That is, the criterion of discrimination is integral to differentiating justifiable war from terrorism and killing in war from murder. Acts of terrorism, unlike acts of justifiable war, knowingly harm and kill non-combatants. Now, those who wish to wage war or respond militarily to terrorism must face the moral dilemma, therefore, of what may be inevitably a conflict between the criterion of discrimination and what is determined to be military necessity. Can a war be just when combating an enemy requires violence that kills non-combatants in addition to the terrorist insurgents? This is especially an issue, of course, in asymmetrical wars such as in Afghanistan and Iraq, where the insurgents tactically intermingle with the civilian population. Now, since we are a moral nation, a nation of laws, and only just war is acceptable, either we must refrain from any action in which civilians are placed in jeopardy, in which case most, if not every, action against the insurgent will be ruled out, or we must find a way of neutralizing or overriding the criterion of discrimination. That is, we must find a way of getting around the laws of war.
Our villages are not where the terrorists are. And that's what we keep telling the US administration. That the war on terrorism is not in the Afghan villages, not in the Afghan homes. Respect that. Civilian casualties are undermining support in the Afghan people for the war on terrorism and for the relations with America. How can you expect the people who keep losing their children to remain friendly? And that's a moral question as well. We have to be morally on a much higher platform in order for us to win the war on terrorism.
And do you worry that the U.S. has not met that standard?
The U.S.
Have they not met their own moral standard?
The U.S. has not met that standard in Afghanistan. The United States must stand on a much higher moral platform in order for us together to win this war.
Next time I will consider the moral argument in greater detail and argue that there is no moral difference between terrorism and acts of collateral damage. They are morally equivalent.